2024. And are there any citizen comments? I don't see any citizens, so we'll move on. Or do I need to go through, should I go through the oratory that goes with citizen comments, or can I just move on? Thank you. So we're moving on to consent agenda. And all items on the consent agenda are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these issues unless a member so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered under section 6, which is items moved from consent agenda. Do we have any items that anyone, the two items that they would like to? Do we have a quorum? Yeah, okay, yeah, we do, okay.
Do we need to?
We're glad you're here.
Do we need to talk about the US Interstate Highway Bridge, or are we good?
Those are under the consent agenda,
You're good.
yeah.
Okay. then
Unless
I
you
will-
saw something in
Unless
there.
you see something on the intended letter.
No, we're good.
Okay, all right, so we're moving on because no one has revoked anything. We're gonna go on to the director's report.
I'm sorry, do we need
We need
to?
a motion.
Oh, we
Motion.
do have to approve the consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
I motion that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, now we can go on to the director's report.
Oh, all right. So I will try and keep things brief. I think Haley informed you as far, we have a room. Gotta get this room turned over for another meeting at 1:30, and so
We gotta be out of here?
we gotta be moving.
All right.
Which I'll get into some of the details as to why the agenda was the agenda. So first off, this is just kind of a general update to some of the stuff you've seen over the past year. Nothing in here that will require any action from you at this point. The stormwater drainage system utility went in place January 1. We fielded various comments, complaints, questions. Currently, we have about 20 recalculation applications in our hopper, or in our queue right now. You can ask for commercial, you can ask for credits, or you can ask for waivers. There's some unique circumstances we're finding, particularly out by the airport. So if you drain away from the city and into the county, even though you may front a city street and that is a unique area as far as right of way. So we found a couple properties out there that don't drain into the MS4, so they don't receive a service from the utility, so they're exempt from the utility. Which makes us feel good, because people will come and accuse us that, oh, you guys are just gonna say that you'll have exemptions and credits and you don't actually give them. And we've issued exemptions and we've issued credits and we're working through it. And it's a new utility, so we have a lot of people on the front end trying to get in, so they don't have to pay money that they don't feel like they have to pay. So it's a lot of, our poor stormwater coordinator, Jeff, is busy, really busy.
Growing pains.
Yep. I will say, I think things have gone very smoothly, considering, it's a new utility and people have to pay for it, so they aren't excited to see the bill, but
Oh, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, were you mainly hearing concerns from big businesses versus homeowners about the bill?
A lot of the big businesses, we went out and we reached out to them and had conversations with them on the front end. We still haven't gotten to the point where they're in the rears enough where we're gonna start taking action on them. There's a handful, I don't think it's in my, there's a handful of properties that haven't paid, whether that's inadvertent or purposely they're not paying. I've talked to utility billing, a lot of phone calls and, hey, why did my bill just go up by $6 or whatever? And it's it's stormwater, and they say, okay, thanks, just wanted to make sure I wasn't being overcharged.
Yes.
Just to kind of follow up on her question, so were you, the applications that you have right now, those 20, so you only have 20 at this time, correct?
15 commercial, 4 5 residential, yes.
Okay, so that's what I want to, okay, so we do have a couple residential ones.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. And how long do you anticipate those to take?
We have a 30-day window to review per code.
Okay, but you don't have, if I remember, you don't have to have an absolute, if it takes longer, because sometimes the calculations could take longer, you just
There's a
have
lot
to
of-
respond to them at that point.
A back and
Sure.
forth of
Right.
making sure that they're complete and,
Okay.
and some people don't like the answers that they get. And so it's, a few of them have been, there's an appeal process that goes to the mayor. I don't know, have we gotten any to the appeal? Yeah, so we haven't gotten any to that process yet. So, yeah, we're processing them as they come. As I said, I think, call volume and complaints have tapered off. We're starting to look at what revenues look like and kind of looking what we projected and looking forward. So we'll keep you in the loop as we this is kind of a unique, our fiscal year starts in October and the utilities didn't start collecting till January, so the utility's in the red. So trying to get out of the red and moving forward into the 25 budget, as we'll talk about that later. A lot of trying to figure out truthing to what we projected as far as revenues and then moving that forward into capital. Other miscellaneous items that we've discussed in the past, Clearwater composting yard waste biosolids agreement, that contract is up at the end of this calendar year. We did give them, the term of the contract expires at the end of this year, but there's a measure in there for 2 5-year extensions. So this next year, 25 to 30 would be the first 5-year extension and 30 to 35 would be the second 5-year extension if we so choose. I took way longer than I wanted it to, but going through and finding the right contract, we didn't have it electronically, so I had to go back and pull it out, get it all put together, amend it, so we are actually amending the contract, not the old contract. Finally, not even formatted correctly. It's off my desk and into purchasing and legal, because just the measures that have changed in Idaho law and purchasing policy since it was adopted in 2015. So that will go through that boring process. At that point, it will then be able to have input for the update to the services that were asked. We've already verbally negotiated some of these services. So we'll get that put together, so I would expect this board looking at that for review in the next 3 months, probably. At this point, there's not a lot moving on it, but we'll probably schedule that as we wrap up budget. Traffic calming policy was gonna be on today's agenda for adoption, or for acceptance, but due to the time constraints, we were afraid it might roll along, so we just punted it to April. So that one is, staff has completed their work and we'll have it in front of you next April. One big policy to just, one big project that I'm gonna put in front of you guys for, you'll take a large role on that, is the Main Street project. I think I've introduced that project in the past, so the mayor has requested that we move forward on a design for a general obligation bond to be voted by the voters in May of 25. So we went out for RFQ for an engineer to do the design services to get us to concept design and a reasonable cost. That will go out to the voters in May. There's a lot of public outreach and engagement and education and all of that other stuff that goes along with this project. So the hope is that they're negotiating with the firm currently to get the scope and cost defined. The hope is that it will go in front of the council for acceptance April 8th. If it doesn't go on April 8th, it'll be the next council after that. So once we have the engineer, then we'll have a better understanding of schedule, but I wanna use this board as kind of the sounding board as we talk about everything from public engagement to size, scope, details of the project. That's, this group is exactly what we want for that type of project. It's gonna be, obviously it's gonna go to vote, so you're gonna get a lot of people that are gonna have to be don't like to use the term educated, but to get caught up on what the city's proposing. And so this group is great to, if you guys wanted to be the town criers, or if you just wanted to give us input on what the messaging should be. So stay tuned for that. Aside from that, working on street pres, and then we'll get into later on the budget. One last bit of housekeeping, we're running into some holidays and some conflicts on schedule. So currently, it's looking like we'll have an April meeting, no May, no June. So, June's a holiday, and May is smack dab in the middle of a lot of our, budget hearings. And so I don't know if we will have the availability to have much. We may end up sending you the packet, well, I know we will send you the information, that anything that has to do with Public Works that goes before the council for budget information, and maybe just invite you to those hearings. I don't know what they're called, meetings, hearings, no, not hearings, work sessions. Invite you to those work sessions.
I like hearings better.
Yeah, with a gavel. Just invite this group to those work sessions instead of getting duplicate information. But, yeah, that will, those 2 dates are popping out because we're gonna miss 2 months generally. So that's really all I have for director's update beyond what we'll talk about in a couple minutes about budget.
Canceling those invites then, or did you make invites for that, or how do you send out your invites? I don't know.
I'll be canceling those.
Canceling, okay.
So. Do you want what is underneath active agenda, the Article 5 red? Okay. Or any of the other colored highlighted? Okay, that was just for our own personal reading. Okay. On to, the next is City of Lewiston budget overview. And that's where we have Finance Director Amy.
So real quick as an introduction, so typically budgets are adopted in August, and working our way backwards through all of that. And I think Amy and a small group of us directors got together and kind of talked about how we could revamp the process. And Amy's kind of taken it and ran with it. Maybe she'll go into it, maybe she won't, but we've changed the process. And so instead of trying to have me tell you about a process that we haven't done yet, and Amy's kind of the head of it, I asked Amy to kind of give you guys an overview. And this is citywide. This isn't, I'll talk about Public Works after she's done, but this is her kind of specialty. So instead of me mudding it up, I'll let Amy talk.
Well, that's fine. I was debating how to do my presentation at the table or here, but it's my understanding you're being live streamed, so I thought I would stay under the microphone. If you guys can see that okay, or I can get a light for you, okay. So, as Dustin mentioned, my name's Amy Gordon, and I'm the City Treasurer and Finance Director. And I thought first I'd start with a little background on myself. I've been with the City of Lewiston for 12 years. Prior to coming to the City of Lewiston, I spent 10 years working in private corporate accounting. And I worked for a conglomerate of companies that they specialized in the insurance industry. So we did everything. We had companies that were provided third-party administration agreements, and we had insurance agencies, kind of the whole gamut of insurance services. And we had probably, I think, about a dozen or more companies that we provided our financial services for. And what was really cool about that is when I transitioned to public accounting, where you do fund accounting, it was really easy for me to get up to speed on that because I was already familiar with due-to-from relationships, related parties, because I had dealt with subsidiary parent companies, related companies through common ownership. So those interactions were very similar to the city, our various funds, and then how they relate to one another. And And I thought I would also give you a review of our financial, just an overview of our financial processes and not just budget. The city, we operate on a fiscal year that runs October through September. So we'll start in early September preparing for that year end. And so we try to be proactive, get as much stuff ready as we can. So once the year end has arrived, we can get in there and process our year end and close out our books for our auditors by mid-November. And then from there, we enter into our audit season, which like just yesterday, I was working on finalizing our submission to the government finance officer. So it will run us through March. And then we jump right into budget because on Monday, we had our budget kickoff with our internal departments. So we're on this cycle, but what we pull from our previous year end that is important going into our upcoming fiscal year is we can get a better measure of reserves, because reserves plays a role when we write our budget, which we'll get into here in a minute. So as Dustin mentioned, we are wanting to take a different approach with budget this year, specifically with the work sessions that we host with council. And in the past, it's been department specific or specific to fund types. And this year, we really want to focus on what drives the change in the budget. So what are the things within the upcoming fiscal year that would create an increase to the budget? So we're gonna first kind of do just a budget 101 with council so that we can provide them just information about the various funds, how those funds are funded, so that there's for example, what funds impact property taxes, which funds don't impact property taxes, and then from there we'll discuss the types of services each fund is responsible for, any other revenues they have available to them, and just kind of how the funding of those budgets work. And then our next work session will dive into revenue. So this would be where Dustin would be approaching council with what he's going to present on by resolution for rate increases to the enterprise funds. And then we will have a work session that focuses specifically on capital projects, which again will be primarily Dustin and his discussion of public work projects. So that would be capital transportation would be covered in that work session, and then any capital projects that would occur in the enterprise fund. So water, wastewater, sanitation, stormwater would be covered in that work session. We'll have a work session that covers personnel cost. And then budget requests. So if a department makes a budget request that they need something additional to their budget than what they have in their base budget already. So, and that could be a one-time thing that they need, or they need to increase their budget for an ongoing need of their department. They would get before council and discuss it at that work session. So if you were a department that you were pretty much gonna be maintaining the same budget you have in your current year, that director may not even present to council that year, because we're just really gonna focus on what would drive any increases to the budget. And then we will have a final budget work session where we just kind of wrap up budget, we put it all together, we review, what we need, if anything, from property taxes. And then that would also be a work session that if council brought anything to us that they wanted additional information on, we could present it at that work session. So being invited to be here with you today was good timing, because we're just now approaching the season. And so these might be work sessions that you'd be interested. I mean, a couple of you will be there anyways, right? But these might be work sessions that you'll be interested in attending or watching. So, the slide looks a lot better when it's not up on a screen like that, because you'll see all the funds that are not public work related are grayed out and you could actually see them. So this is a good test, because I was gonna use similar slides for the work session, so I'm gonna have to play with that a bit. But if you could see the full slide, like you can see back on the computer monitor there, we have a total of 16 funds citywide. And of those 16 funds, these are the ones that involve public works. The transportation fund, I have it in green because that's our operating fund, so there's no capital necessary, or there's no capital in that fund. That's where their operations, maintenance is paid for. Any capital projects that are transportation related would be out of the capital fund. And I will also mention the capital fund does include other functions of the city. There's budget in there for parks as well as library, but each of them, parks, library, transportation, they have their own revenues that are applicable to only them within that fund. With transportation capital, it's a mixture of property taxes, highway user fees. Is it just those two?
A road and bridge tax.
No, that goes into your operating fund.
Oh, I thought.
Yeah. But, so there is just property taxes and then their highway user fees that they receive from the state of Idaho. So what I did here is put together a little information on enterprise funds because within an enterprise fund, they have both their operating budget and their capital budget. When Dustin is looking at the rates that are appropriate to fund the needs of that service each year, he takes into consideration what we need to operate and maintain our plants or the infrastructure related to that enterprise fund, and then also the capital needs of that fund. So they come into the fund as user rate, which is operational revenue. So all your user fees that you collect come into your operational revenues. And then the way we create funding for capital projects is through the depreciation of the systems. So for example, if our water plant and the related components to our water treatment facility is depreciating at $1.5 to $2 million a year, we fund that to the capital side. So as we depreciate off of those systems, there's a component of that entry where it's moving cash from operations to capital side. And then those funds then will pay for any improvements to the plant and facility, which would include pipe replacements and then any vehicles or equipment that is necessary to run those plants and facilities. In addition, with water and wastewater, those rates also have to be sufficient enough to provide funding to the capital side to cover their bond repayments, which those were in, that component of the rate was in place at the time that we entered into those debt agreements. So there wouldn't be any future needs of rate increases to fund the bonds. Those are already incorporated into our current rates. But they will move from the operating to the capital side and then fund the debt. So when we build our budget, so legally we can only adopt 1 year at a time. And from my office, we're just focused on that 1 year. So we, with the enterprise funds, because they have their own funding mechanism within their user rates for their capital projects, they'll just build into their budget what their master plans are telling them or what their immediate needs are for capital improvements. We'll go in our office, we'll put them into the budget, and then we'll look at how those expenses compare to their current year funding from depreciation. And then based off that, they may or may not need to also use reserves. So if their projects exceed what they're getting each year in funding from the depreciation, then they're gonna have to utilize their capital reserves. Which is common, but we'll then take a look at those reserves and we'll make certain that their reserves are sufficient to cover those capital projects. And then if they're not, we might have to then have discussions with the system managers on what could potentially be delayed another year or but we just our office, we just focus on 1 year at a time. And then, but, you know, like Dustin's master plans will extend out many, many years beyond that. We have, I think part of your guys' discussions recently have been, well, what happens when you have a public works project that involves more than one entity? And so those can be challenging because you need to potentially have each system participate in the project and provide some funding for that project, and they may not all be in the same position with their reserves. Right now, wastewater reserves are really healthy. Waters are not. So water is our biggest challenge, I think, when it comes to rates, because that's where we get the most feedback from citizens, where they're feeling those rates the most. But sometimes that doesn't always align with when your timing of your project, when you want it to be. Do you sit around and you wait for water to catch up, or do you figure out a way to get them the funding that they would need to participate in that project? One thing that's, I don't know if it's unique to the city of Lewiston, but one thing we always have to take into consideration with the city is our property taxpayers are not the same as our water payers, are not the same as our wastewater payers. Everybody in the city is a property taxpayer, but we have probably less than 50% of our population that's a water rate payer, and less than 50% of our population that's a wastewater rate payer. We're all sanitation rate payers, so we always are mindful to make certain we're not putting a burden onto property taxpayers that's for the water system, because not every property taxpayer is a benefactor of the water system. So those are always the things we take into consideration. And we make certain that we do time studies to account for the services the enterprise funds receive from the general fund. So the financial services they receive, the legal services, and we make certain that costs are being allocated fairly to each group of payers. Those are the challenges we look at, that we face when we're building out those budgets, is what revenues are available to each fund, and then there are projects specifically that they themselves have, but then potentially shared project costs. And then I didn't know if you had any kind of specific information you were wanting from me, so I left this open to questions.
No, I think that's exactly what I was hoping for, so to let the board kind of direct where we want to go from here. We can talk to Amy, we can talk to me, I can give you a little overview of the specifics when it comes to public works, but let's ask you. Amy needs, if you have any questions for Amy.
Do we have? I kind of have one. How can you have property taxpayers that don't pay water or wastewater?
I don't pay city water or wastewaters. I live in the orchards and I am not part of the city's water plant system
sorry.
or their wastewater.
I know.
So I'm in LOSD's district and then Lloyd's district.
Okay, being down here, I
Yeah.
heard that.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
So, and specifically, or where in the city does that change? Is it that top of thing grade, or?
Well, the boundary's
Deeper.
different for water and wastewater. I think once you pass maybe Stewart Avenue, you're safely into Lloyd Water.
Yeah.
But then there's also, but the sewer lines are, they're,
Old.
well, I mean, those lines are gonna be based off whether you're COSD or LOSD, but LOSD is typically West Orchards, COSD is typically East Orchards. I think there is some city sewer that goes
Yeah,
up to the
with the
perimeter
Central
there.
Orchards project that's moving east is kind of going around.
Yeah, so those will be interesting boundaries, more we build.
Okay. And then what, and this is kind of a general question, what is the primary driver of variations in the budget as far as less continuity in the budget, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I think I understand what you're asking. So one of the things we've received a lot of feedback these last few years on our budget is there was this big pop, this big growth in our budget. And one thing to keep in mind there is we had these bond projects that we were doing at water and wastewater. So if you kind of narrow into the water and wastewater lines of our budget, you'll see that that's what's driving those big spikes in our budget. Even though those are being funded by bond revenue, we have to capture that bond revenue in our budget, and then we capture the spending of those funds in our appropriations budget. So we'll see those come down this next year because we will truly in '25 no longer have these bond-funded projects. But, wastewater, they're gonna continue to still have these high project expenses because they are cash funding a lot of their plant improvements. Their bond was significantly less than water, but they had approximately the same amount of money that needed, same amount of improvements that were needed at their plant. So they just had the ability to cash fund some of theirs where water did not.
So understanding that we have certain water customers and whatnot, does the city operate in a sense that a park has probably restrooms and water needs and all of that bit? Are they charged those expenses towards their budget for that location? Or is that something that's just absorbed by those two departments?
No, city facilities are customers of the city as well.
So they are
So
charged?
each month we issue in utility bills to all the city facilities. And then parks, they pay for their irrigation based off their budget, but they are billed monthly for their metered fees.
Okay. So then would that mean, when you're looking at the overall budget of like parks and things of that nature, do those people understand that, like, I'm trying to see if I can explain this correctly, and I'm not doing a very good job of it. But when departments have to pay their own, that means, it's being funded essentially because those are, they don't have a ton of revenue coming in. So eventually, parks and everything, it's going to come from the general fund, is that correct?
Yes, so if you are billing a city facility for your water bill, and it's a facility that provides governmental services, so fire, police, city hall, community center,
Everybody's supporting
those
that.
are being paid for out of the general fund.
Okay.
And so those are being paid primarily by property taxpayers, but those services are being received by the governmental funds, the governmental services. Water plant, their water bill will go to the water department to pay. Wastewater's water bill will go to wastewater to pay.
Okay. So then, in examining, you also brought up the issue of capital improvement projects. Obviously, the director just brought up a huge one that's coming forward with a bond next year and whatnot that we will be discussing over this next year. That one we know, based on our previous conversations, it's going to involve lots of other budgets to support that. So I guess it's kind of a cart before the horse, so it sounds like under the capital improvement portion of it, you're trying to get that all funded through a bond. It's not going to affect the other capital improvement projects, or we're not sure at this point.
Not to go into the weeds too deep, but like the Main Street project.
I'm just talking high level.
So, yes,
Okay,
yes.
So-
Each individual enterprise fund would pay their own portion of that hopefully wouldn't be included as part of that bond. Water is the exception. Water has a couple $1 million left over on ARPA dollars, but the ARPA dollars have to be spent, they have to be obligated by the end of this year and spent by the end of '26. Main Street probably won't be ready to construct by that time period, with the full, getting it passed by the bond, designed, bid, constructed. That won't meet the ARPA deadlines. So we don't have that ratepayer money in reserves right now to just backfill that ARPA money and spend the ARPA money somewhere else. And so there may be a water component as part of that bond, but I had that conversation yesterday, so that's an evolving.
Cause that was gonna be one of the big concerns I had coming up, going on, since you kind of broached the subject, I was just kind of curious where that stood since the
Yep.
reservoir issue.
We need to get creative, I mean, cause yeah, it's that bird in the hand and two in the bush, that we've got ARPA dollars, we've got direction to
And they
upgrade.
have to be spent.
They have to be spent, and I would hate to defer that money into second tier water needs in the downtown, which there's plenty, but then have the bond fail, and here we're left with the whole point of this water main on Main Street not being completed and not having funds to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then legally, we can, it's my understanding from a preliminary meeting we had, you can pay for utility improvements from a GO bond, but whether that's something we would pursue or not, and, because we'd have to look at how the repayment of that would work.
Any other questions?
So moving into specifically the public works side, so Amy talked about the two dates that are pending that are kind of heavy on the public works is the 13th is revenue, which is gonna be specifically to us user rates, and then 20th is the capital. So this is where my brain didn't trigger after we adopted last year's budget, and we talked about moving the schedule forward. We talked about, so if you've ever watched me talk, the circular, we do master plan, then we do a rate study, and then we do implementation, and so it's cyclical. When I started here in 2020, we were just wrapping up the rate studies, the master plans have been in place, and so we were constructing it. So henceforth, we get the plants, we get all the construction going on. So now, the master plans were done pre-2020, the rate study was done pre-2020, and so now we're looking at the recommendations from the rate study. Rate study said, for example, water, I know off the top of my head, was 5.25 annual 5.25 rate increases through 2031. Those are based off of numbers from the old master plan, which is basically almost completed, and a rate study that was looking at projections of inflation of about 2.5% to 3.5% from 2020 to 2024. So pre-COVID numbers, pre-COVID CPI, all of that stuff. So now that we're moving ahead with a quicker, earlier discussion on rates, I've reached out to the consultant that did our original rate study, and we're frantically trying to get some sort of analysis in front of, I don't know if it'll be in front of this board. We will have it ready for the May 13th to present to the council. And I'm already projecting there's gonna have to be a give and take. We have to fill reserves, we have to keep up with rates, and we have to build the capital. But I don't know that we can do all three. We'll be lucky to do one. So that's gonna be a bigger conversation for the council, and we can take those marching orders from them at the 5/13 meeting to say, okay, we're gonna live on a lowered reserve than what we want for this budget year, or we're not gonna invest in capital, or we're gonna raise rates significantly to catch up on this backlog. So
Which rates is that again? Sorry, just
that's water.
water rates.
Yeah. Yeah, water is, it's gonna be a difficult conversation, because there's no right answer.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to follow up on, so your revenue discussion on the 13th for the budget workshops, you're only kind of discussing user rates at that point?
So, yeah,
So, because I know that Public Works has a zillion other revenue sources that come in. Granted, some are dedicated to certain things, so you don't present, you're not gonna be like sharing all of the various revenue funds that come in so that they understand that, because sometimes I guess people don't understand that, and this is where it's kind of frustrating, at least, thinking about it. in my head. Sometimes I think, well, my user rates are covering all of this, okay, and that's not the case. We have this, gas tax come in, but gas tax is a dedicated thing, but guess what, folks? That gas tax will go towards street projects that we have, whether it's in operations and or CIP, however it gets things. We have this revenue source that comes in, and it's, not so restricted, it can be used for this and this. So that, sometimes that kind of helps the blow a little bit, so foreign users think that they're doing just that, so when you have the discussion about user rates, sometimes I feel then they kind of like, okay, well, all these, I'm not paying all this, because I think sometimes people feel you're taking money out of that fund, even though people, I know it's an enterprise fund, I get that, I'm talking about how people view that when they come in and we're paying it, it's like, shoot, they're not even using it towards that, and I think that would kind of maybe help that blow as you're trying to put that argument forward. And then maybe that helps you put together maybe a plan saying to the council, maybe saying, so this year, because I agree with you, you're not gonna get that, probably. Say, let's tackle this year, and in year 2, we're gonna tackle this in year 3. How's this 3-year plan? Maybe that's the thing to go at. I don't know, because I agree with you 100%. You're not gonna get money.
Yeah, I think Amy's component will be, or I'm assuming it will be Amy, I mean, that, because there will be, my component will be the enterprise funds specifically, and that's where I'll speak to the rate studies and the master plans.
So you're not gonna get into any of it? Okay.
I don't know that I think, well, one, we haven't done this presentation yet, or ever, really. The way it's done, and it's kind of based off, actually, the feedback that you provided last year of dividing capital and capital and operating, and so trying to parse that out. So we haven't even talked, I mean, this is kind of on the fly here of how, the chart that didn't show up necessarily, but here's all and my experience, where I came from in county government, we talked about the colors of money. These are the colors of money, and these are the revenue sources, and these where those revenue sources can be spent. I think there's probably a good, maybe it takes 45 seconds to say, let's be perfectly clear here, there's enterprise funds, there's these funds, and so that they go through. It's been my experience, when I get up there, people are like, great, I pay gas tax. I pay gas tax whether I get gas in McCall or Lewiston or Boise. I pay water in Lewiston and your water's high, they jump right on to what are the rate increases going to be? And so that's usually where I get the most questions and spend the most time.
That's fortunate, good, because like I said, in past experience, people think, their rate is funding everything, that you're taking from that fund and using it towards theirs, so that way they have to keep paying more in this fund to cover it.
Yeah. So revenue would be on the 13th, and I think the hope on that would be, that gives us, with the council hearing it, with the questions, we can build our budget, the capital budget. So for whatever, let's say we have that water discussion on the 13th, and they say, we cannot provide anything greater than a 3% rate increase. Okay, that's the decision of it's not official, but that gives us much more clarity moving forward. I'd rather have them come out and say, it's not official, but to say, I won't vote for 5.5, or I won't vote for 4. I'll vote for 3.5. Okay, great. A straw poll allows me to go back to our team and look at the technical side of it and say, okay, we have to get this one done. We have to get this one done. This one we'll have to just punt on. And so we can build our capital budget that we'll present on the 20th. And this is unique, this is different, that we haven't done before, but I can hopefully be able to show them, based off of our conversation last week, this is what we would project revenues generally to be. This is that line of what we would expect to be able to move forward into capital. And as Amy already said, this is gonna be, we have a known debt service that we're paying for the plants. We have, all the expenses that we have in operating, and then we'll just talk about specifically, this is where we're gonna go with capital. Capital, and just real high level, capital is kind of for the two, specifically for the two enterprise funds, or the water and sewer enterprise funds, we're turning the corner. Previously, up to this point, it was all major projects, new wells, new treatment plants, big projects at a specific location. Moving forward, both of those utilities are gonna be focusing on pipeline replacement. And so there is miles and miles and miles of water and sewer pipe that needs to be replaced. It's all over the city, and so it's our, prioritizing, as we've already talked about, putting projects together, overlapping them, coordinating with street pres, coordinating with Lloyd, the sewer district, trying to make sure that we're addressing the highest, with the worst pipes in the network, while at the same time trying to be efficient with our, street cuts and construction projects. So that is a whole different ballgame that will be, we always have had a pipeline replacement program, but it's gonna be on steroids. We'll be ramping it up considerably, so, and it's a necessity. So those are the two dates that I'm looking the most at. And like I said, I would love to be able to have this conversation with you guys. There will be some sort of a conversation on rates in April, but I don't know how much I'll have for information, because like I said, I wish I had thought of this in October, November, after we just started the current budget, so I could have this out, but now it feels like I'm in a hurry to get these rates analyzed and kind of vetted through. The only other thing to add was, this was in the packet, correct? Yep. Was in your packet, was the Public Works, and I think most departments do this. There was this sheet within there talking about what we're looking for in budget impacts moving forward in the next year. This is just the snapshot of when we printed it. I don't see a lot of major, beyond what's capital, and those are programmed within our CIPs. I don't see a lot of asks beyond for what we would need. You can see traffic is looking for some signboards. Those are those electronic message boards that are on trailers. We're finding with the projects that we've done over the last couple of years, Asotin County had 2, and so we kind of shared them. They're down to 1, and it's always, if you have a road construction project, it's good to have 2, one coming from each direction. They're usually available at auctions. I don't necessarily think we need a new one, but I would like to get 2, and maybe we buy 1